uncompromising. And it's going to be hard for Anish to kind of just shut the gates and kind of knuckle down in a solid position. OK, we start with a Reti opening, very flexible. David Anton plays everything, right, Lawrence? Every opening under the sun.
Oh, yes. David Anton, very, very versatile player. Doesn't feel uncomfortable in really any position, and today he's just playing a Colle. I mean, Bishop E2. I mean, this is
not the most aggressive start. I'm expecting there to be fireworks, and I really thought that David Anton would just go hard, and Anish, of course, playing the most principled line. In fact, developing the light squared bishop. Now, this is actually quite critical already for the white side, because unless David actually extracts something, he's going to be just level. I mean, he will have nothing from the opening.
I mean, it's basically a Queen's
Gambit decline reversed, isn't it? It's
reverse colours. It's as if David Anton, he was like, oh, I prefer playing with the black pieces, so I'll play a black opening. And Anish, he's going to love this. So white does have the bishop pair. I guess that's the only real imbalance. The pawn structure is something we call the Carlsbad structure. There's a lot of material out there in books and video content about this pawn structure from the Queen's Gambit, usually. It can also arise from the Caro-Kann, Jovanka.
Yep.
And a few others. This position looks actually very similar to a Caro-Kann defence. But, yeah, it's going to take a slower turn now while both sides try to come up with plans. I've got to agree, I'm not a huge fan of this opening by David Anton, but it's a playable position. Still a lot of life left.
And it's the reason because it's not something you would play in a must-win situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure it suits his strengths. Anish has kind of got a solid foundation. Black's pawn structure is very harmonious. Black has a clear plan or two as well. Black can play on the queen side by pushing Black's A and B pawns later. That's something we call a minority attack. Actually, it's quite rare to push pawns on the side that you're weaker, where you have fewer pawns. But Anish can also push in the centre later. David Anton, he's got to play with pieces. He doesn't really want to push with pawns anytime soon. But, OK, the white pieces, they're coming out now. It takes a while to get them to their ideal squares. That's the issue for white.
I must say, I'm a big fan of the position for black.
Yeah.
Not for white. I mean, yeah, white has the bishop pair, but, I mean, if you take a look at the pawn structure, you can see it's relatively stable. No side is going to be advancing pawns, as David mentioned. And there's also no clear pawn breakthroughs. And I think this favours the knights. And there we see the light square bishop drop back, and it's probably going to manoeuvre itself again to a better diagonal.
Is this an optical illusion, though? Because if we had this position with reverse colours, so if we had white's position but with black, where it would normally arise in the Queen's Gambit, we would be like, yeah, I'm fine out of the opening. I've survived. I've equalised. Maybe it's just I've got an extra tempo because we start with the white pieces. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but for those out there, those viewers who do play the Queen's Gambit declined as black, this type of position that we now see for white, it must be very, very familiar. It's very strange to just kind of play a less ambitious opening, but with one extra tempo like this.
And it's not very his style, David Anton, is that what you said?
Not usually. Usually he's got some kind of tricky ideas up his sleeve in whatever he plays, or usually he likes to challenge the opponent quite early on, but he's taken a slower approach. And, OK, Giri, meanwhile, pausing. This is what we're used to seeing from the top players when they're about to come up with a middle game plan. We're done with the opening, both sides have castled, and it's just formulating a plan over the next 5-6 moves. That's why he stopped. He'll maybe think for another minute or two, Anish, then he'll play a few moves very, very quickly. But, yeah, I mean, from the Caro-Kann, Jovanka, you have a lot of experience. Maybe if we jump in just to show where some of the pieces go, or some of the usual plans. OK, Black's queen moving, very logical.
Why is that logical?
I guess you want to connect the rooks.
OK.
At the end of any opening, now the rooks are flexible. The queen's in the way previously, so this rook couldn't really step anywhere decent. It could step behind a pawn, but it's a bit blocked in there. So now the queen moves, and Black can choose maybe to bring the rook to this square or maybe this square. Often, for example, if white moves his bishop, Jovanka, you mentioned that this is maybe a better square for the white bishop, staring down this side of the board. Maybe Black can even consider at some point bringing his rook across and pushing these pawns. You have to time this correctly. But the idea would be, for example, if white does nothing, to launch that minority attack. So often 2 pawns, they bear down against 3 pawns, and the whole idea is no matter what happens now, whether white captures or whether white kind of leaves it. The trade of these pawns will leave white with an isolated pawn no matter what. So, OK, black's played the queen to a normal square. I'm expecting this move. What would happen next, for example, if black waits? Would we put up?
Well, I mean, knight f3 is kind of very standard here.
And there's one thing that black has to be careful with, because if you take a look at the pawns are pointing to the left, and you're like, hey, all the fun and games is going to happen on the left side. That is true, but you always have to take care of the king. And take a look at the black king, doesn't have too many defenders around it. So as long as black is prepared to guard the king and just be aware that it could be in danger, then it should be fine. And he pushes a little pawn move over there, and that's primarily to say to the dark square bishop that white has, I mean, where are you going to go? What square are you going to develop to, my friend? Chess is like that. We're a bit mean at times, and it gives us certain satisfaction. But on the other hand, that pawn move also has its danger as well, because it's the pawn move, and the bishop could sacrifice itself at the right time and blast open the king.
Yeah. Later you need to prepare it, but OK, the pawn structure has actually changed, so Anish doesn't want to just sit patiently in this position. He blasts things open, and this looks exactly like a variation of the Caro-Kann now that I've had many times before myself. And after a trade of pawns, the white knight offers an exchange, and isolated queen's pawn, the IQP as we call it.
IQP,
yes.
isolated queen's pawn.
Isolated queen's pawn. And it comes up from a bunch of openings, the Queen's Gambit, from the Caro-Kann, from French defence, from
Nimzo India.
Nimzo India, and I could go on and on.
There are lots.
There are lots. So these players, they'll be familiar with the ideas. Usually this pawn, it's nice to blockade it, especially with a knight in the centre, because that would be an outpost for the white knight. Also, you don't want to trade off too many pieces, because the more pieces that disappear, the weaker this pawn will become.
So is that now a super strong piece in Anish's camp?
The pawn?
Yeah.
Yes, at the moment, at least. So it does control a lot of central squares, and black has great piece play. But, yeah, again, you have to be careful. Certain endgames will be very bad for black because of its weakness. And, OK, I was going to say there's a choice of which piece to take first. I often in these pawn structures actually take the knight, but he decides to take the bishop. And now, again, the question is, pieces are coming off the board. Is this a strength or weakness? White has a simple plan. You just park your bishop in the centre, maybe even on this square. You just centralise your rooks, and black has to kind of just sit and wait and hope that the structure is not too deficient.
And it's on the board.
Yeah, it's really interesting. OK, Anish really begging to exchange pieces. It's just interesting that Anish is willing to go into a slightly worse position, I think, just because he's confident in his defensive skills.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is, people watching this at home, if you've got a basic knowledge of the theory of isolated queen's pawn positions, it's that when you've got the isolated queen's pawn, you're supposed to keep pieces on the board, especially minor pieces, because you've got great piece play, so you want to use those pieces for an attack. But Anish is voluntarily exchanging his pieces, and theoretically, with every single exchange, his position should be slightly worse, because in the end, white is going to try and basically blockade, like David Anton is doing now, and win that d5 pawn. Note, Kaya, how the white pawn structure is very, very solid. 2 pawn islands, the pawns are connected, no real weaknesses, whereas black has got this glaring weakness now on d5. The good news for Anish is that it's well protected at the moment, and he can still, as for example the move rook e4, show great piece play. Nevertheless, white has got what we call a long-term static advantage, and static in the sense that the d5 pawn is static. It cannot be exchanged, it cannot be traded, so that's there for a long time.
So it's not a strength anymore.
Pros and cons, right?
Pros and cons, yes. It's probably more of a weakness than a strength, I would say. But I really like Anish's last move, for example, rook e4.
Yeah, it wouldn't be possible, this rook move, unless he had this central pawn supporting this square. Sorry, Ivanka.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say one of the things that you have to bear in mind when you do have a structural weakness like that weak pawn is that you should go about controlling open lines. And I like Anish's move as well. And now David Anton's move took me by surprise because that's weakening the king a little bit. But it's asking the question to the rook, where are you going to go? Are you going to step back? Are you going to trade? Probably has to take a step all the way back. Back again.
Yeah.
Dear, oh dear.
So he's lost 2 moves, Anish Giri, but he has provoked this slightly weakening move, as you say, Ivanka. The reason it's slightly weakening is actually that white's pushed this pawn as well, so there are holes kind of on the dart squares. And, I mean, if this pawn was back 1 square, I would say, OK, this is great for white. This pawn dominates the black knight, but, yeah, it's still very hard to come up with a productive plan.
Do you like the move G4 here? I mean, I'm serious. You put the king on G2, you control some squares.
You want to start attacking black?
No, I just want to find a safe haven for my king. It's out of the pin.
It's the type of move that David Anton might play, actually. I've seen him do similar things before.
Is it so ridiculous here? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, because black's knight is far away from taking advantage of these kind of weak squares that you've left behind.
It feels so loose. I mean, as someone who thrives on the counterattack, I'm like, come on, give me those squares.
Not yet. Maybe later, Lawrence.
Yeah, later. I mean, this move is quite nice by David Anton, you know, just securing those dark squares. And, well, it's an exciting day. And we love it when you at home also join in on the action. Share with us your selfies, your pictures, your thoughts. And you can do that by tweeting us using the hashtag #ChessChamps. And also you mentioned earlier on, Kaya, that, you know, we do have the chance for our expert, David, to analyse your games using Aimchess. And I do quite like Donkey Chess's tweet where he says, I need help because I keep making the same mistakes. Hashtag help me, David. I like the plea.
That's a good application.
Yes, it is. The queen retreats.
Yeah, the queen is actually eyeing up some of those squares. We mentioned that white has left behind, essentially, with those pawn pushes. Black's queen now on a really nice diagonal, could swoop in at some point. That's just kind of a, you know, an annoying move, I would say, just hinting that the queen will come in. Maybe it doesn't even want to, but David Anton now forever has to guard those dark squares around the white king. Still very, very tense, roughly level, but can David Anton create anything against black's isolated pawn? Maybe it's just going to be a long, long grind when all the rooks disappear, which they will most likely eventually.
Probably now, right? Takes rook e1 is just the absolutely standard continuation.
Yeah, and it will come down to an endgame of queen and knight against queen and knight, again with better pawn structure for white, but minimal firepower left.
Yeah.
And also white in the endgame will still have to look after the king now that the queens are on the board.
Yeah, I mean, David Anton, maybe the dream scenario would be getting the rooks off and the queens off.
Yeah.
If it's just queens and pawns, if the knights disappear, probably that's still a draw as well. But if you get the queens off and the rooks off, so it's just knights and pawns left, maybe then some chances, because white's knight will always be superior to the black, to its counterpart. But again, we're talking kind of long-term strategy and looking for tiny, tiny, small advantages. Anish says, yes, you can trade rooks, but on my terms.
Maybe it's now time for the white king to take a step forward.
Yeah, why not?
Oh, my God. That would be such a gutsy move if it happened. I mean...
In the endgame, white's king can join the fun.
Yeah, but still the queen and rook. I mean, it's something to be advised with caution, you know. Take care, don't just march your king up the board, especially when there are rooks and queens on the board. Yeah.
I would be terrified.
With good reason,
But that's
Kaya.
because I forget to look at where my king is.
I mean, if you do a quick... one piece of advice that I got given when I was a kid, I used it quite extensively, was that just before you make your move, you sit on your hands. I mean, it sounds so elementary. And you just do a quick, like, board scan, and you just think about the move that you on the verge of playing.
Yeah.
And you just go, does it drop? Does it fall off? Can my opponent do anything to win it? And if the answer is no, go ahead and play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll see that move, Ivanka. If not now, then over the next 2 or 3 turns.
Yeah, well, And OK, the rook steps forward 2
They're
squares.
like, let's take the rooks off, but none of them want to like initiate it.
So they kind
After
of
you.
Yeah.
They're both gentlemen. After you.
on my
Exactly.
terms.
No, you go first. No, you
But
go first.
it's actually with good reason, because basically neither side wants to concede the only open file on the board. So, for example, let's say Black were to take here, David, to illustrate this point. If Black takes here, Queen takes, and White now the Queen has got all of that open space. So it's a bit of, as you guys were saying, no, you please first, sir. But White now has got an opportunity. Let's say Black were to play a move like a6 here, which is also a very logical move, that White can now come behind the rook with the Queen and effectively force the trade, because now there's no real way to keep the rook on there. There might be some funky way, but it looks a bit artificial. But yeah, and then White can claim a small victory here because he's got the open file. Is it enough? Well, it's very, very little.
But the end game is all about collecting those small little advantages.
Yeah.
I mean, you get your basket and you go better king, better queen, better pawns.
Open file.
Open line, yeah. I mean, this is everything. And slowly they build up to something quite unpleasant, and the psychological pressure as well. Let's not forget that.
And the bar is slowly going up for David Anton, now up to 0.5. I think that's the most it's been all game.
Yeah, it's unlikely we'll see the evaluation bar swing drastically in one side's favour, but it could be that kind of slow incremental gains, like you guys say. And I think you're right, Lawrence. We'll see most likely this queen move. Maybe you go back
One, yeah.
one of these 2 squares just to nudge the rook and say, OK, after you. And I mean, the other move we might see is this king move. We mentioned that it's a bit scary sometimes, but the white king is pretty safe. And we do indeed see your plan, Lawrence. The queen drops back and White occupies the open file. No entry points. This square is covered. This square is covered by the black knight. So you can't creep into the black position yet. But Black now has to be a bit vigilant.
I think,
The white king's coming next move.
yeah, Queen b6.
We're going to say, Lawrence, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, also, in a lot of these positions, White can put the knight in a more aggressive outpost. A knight on f5, Kaya. If
Will
you're gonna-
thrive.
A knight on f5 will yeah.
For example.
You've seen it before, yeah. Kasparov once said a knight on f5 was worth nearly a whole pawn.
Wow.
It's not quite in this position. When you've got a lot of other pieces on the board and you're attacking, that knight is just so brutal because it touches all of the sort of sensitive points around the black king. And when it can't be kicked away, it's a very annoying piece. In this position, because there's such a reduction of material, there's only an additional queen, it's not such a big deal. But even a lonely little knight on f5 can sometimes cause you difficulties.
Another thing in the basket.
Yeah, and that's why in the game, Anish, he's played this queen move. First, he was attacking a pawn. This was dealt with by the pawn stepping forward, but he's trying to prevent that idea of Lawrence's, this knight move, because now he's staring down on the same diagonal as the white pieces. I mean, it could be a factor, for example, if, OK, let's say the black queen moves. It could be a factor that David Anton could still play this move, either now or in the next few turns, knight f5, and he's saying, OK, if you don't trade off the queens right now, then the white knight is going to be really scary. It's going to be really strong. And the queen exchange, we mentioned that this endgame, again, it's not much, but it's slightly better for white because black's knight is always going to be tied down to this isolated pawn. So it's, again, tiny little things here. In the current position, David Anton has maybe a small threat of the white queen getting active. There is an entry square into the black camp, and I'm expecting Anish to deal with that.
And David Anton, he knows this is a game. He most likely needs to win. So will we see him take some risks in this game?
At some point, a moment will most likely come where he'll have to do something, whether that's taking advantage of a mistake from Anish or whether it's kind of bluffing Anish or kind of creating a threat or two that might be hard to react to. But so far, David Anton, he's using a strategy that works quite a lot, actually. I'm mostly thinking of Kasparov against Karpov. I think it was in Seville. And Kasparov needed to win the final game to keep his title. If a draw, Karpov would have regained the World Championship title, and Kasparov just went really slowly about his business, and eventually Karpov cracked. Everyone thought he was just going to attack from the move one. It's Kasparov after all, but he just played on his opponent's nerves. And David Anton, he will have seen yesterday, Giri was a bit nervous, took a couple of quick draws, and David Anton will be like, OK, I'm going to have a slightly better position. You're going to be fighting for the draw. You're going to forget about any winning chances, and I'm going to slowly play on your nerves, play on your negativity. So interesting strategy.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah. When was that World Championship game you said? Seville?
1990, I think. I'm not the best chess historian out there, but it was, yeah, a long, long time ago.
So
Really
everyone
instructive
was shocked when Kasparov didn't play to his normal style?
Yeah, exactly. He adapted things just because he knew that his opponent would be a bit nervous. And he was very patient, and that's rare in a must-win situation.
Wow.
That's what David Anton's showing now, very much patience. And, OK, the queen does choose an active square. Just keeping an eye on some of the white pawns, but also controlling e7. The white queen wanted to go there, remember? And now, surely, the white king joins in.
Well, I like this move, because let's say you do play king f2. Is his idea to play queen a3 and just bother these pawns? But, of course, you can defend them easily with queen e2 or queen d2. But maybe he's going to just poke around there.
So maybe you think poke around this side of the board.
Yeah, for example, queen e2 might actually be a mistake, because queen c1 there might be a bit...
So you want black to start sneaking in
Yeah.
from behind and start attacking some pawns.
Exactly.
I guess that's why David Anton decided in the current position, this is actually quite a clever move. This is the only undefended point in the whole white camp, the only undefended pawn, so he pushed it forward. So now if the black queen comes in, it's not actually attacking anything. Very clever, actually. It comes in anyway. The knight does defend this pawn, however. And Anish, he's just saying the white queen can't come in, it can't use this square because black's queen covers that square. And again, it can't kind of even sneak in this way because of some nasty checks. And this pawn would suddenly drop.
Yeah, and because of those checks, I think it's high time for the white king to hide itself away, and that's the square I was thinking of. You know, use its pawns as a shield. And then, you know, there's still the idea of the white queen, you know, jumping forward to the 5th row or to the 7th row or to even the knight coming at the right time. Oh, we have a check.
Yep.
It's very exciting when we get checks.
Yeah.
It's like, what's going to happen? Is the king going to run away? Is a pawn going to step forward?
First check of the game, I think. It's been a while. And, OK, this check. If the king goes back, then at the very least, black could go back and repeat the position. Or maybe he could even jump in this way towards the white king. I'm expecting a pawn block. But again, every pawn push you make, you can't go backwards with pawns. Suddenly the black queen could come back, and suddenly the second rank is undefended. It's open.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, actually.
And the white king is not going to find a good safety point. I mean, even if you were to kind of try to hide on a different row, like the 3rd row, I mean, it's still not going to be very easy because the queen kind of find ways to sneak behind, give checks.
Suddenly this king, it's not ideally placed. But how else to block this check? If you push this pawn forward, you give a key square in the centre of the board to the black knight. And now we see that black's isolated pawn is really strong, anchoring this outpost.
Oh, no.
OK, we've seen this position happen for a second time. David Anton definitely won't go for the draw, though. He won't repeat the position for a 3rd time. He'll try something different. I've never really played anyone in the world as ambitious and as draw-averse as David Anton.
Oh.
Every game I play him, he tries to fight for the win. And Lawrence's move on the board.
With the accent. No, you have to do it with the accent, David.
G4. G4. Makes a lot of sense. You give your king a bit more breathing room, and sometimes the king can just sit on g2, or sometimes even g3, as David is showing. It restricts the knight a bit more on f6. I would have preferred it a few moves ago because I am a little loose around the back, but yeah, I mean, as the bar is showing, it says 0-0-0. I do believe the position is probably equal, but I think it's probably a little bit more tricky for black to play, but queen b2 is a very logical move.
Yeah, cutting the king off so the king can't advance, and also tying down the white knight to this pawn. The white knight has to stay defending, the white queen has to stay defending here. But I was going to say, there's nothing else to do. Those pieces are tied down. Push Harry the h-pawn. That's the modern trend. And there is a specific idea here. White wants to push the g-pawn forward now that it's supported by its buddy, and the black knight will be kicked away. Suddenly black's king will feel a bit loose if this defender, its guardian, the knight, is removed. So, OK, slowly heating up despite what the evaluation bar says. Both players have been playing quite quickly, but it's Anish now dealing with a threat against his knight.
Why didn't he push Harry 2 squares?
It was already on h3.
Already on h3. So
That's why.
yeah. If it had been on h2, he would have played the same move, pushed it 2 squares. So you're right, Kaya. It's more important to just support the pawn next to it.
And if he pushes this pawn, could he just take it with the h pawn?
That's right.
Yeah, that will happen. And this is why we needed Harry to support, because Harry will recapture and the status quo continues, where essentially you need a pawn to kick away the black knight. If in this position, White had been too hasty, not pushed Harry, if he'd pushed Gary first, then after a capture, White can only take with a queen, but that wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't threaten anything. And actually, White's queen would be losing defense of some other pawns. And Anish, wow, interesting move. In the game situation, kind of met with the threat of pushing this pawn forward. He's just saying, yeah, you do it, you go ahead. He's blocking things up. So now this has got to be critical, right?
It has to be critical. I mean, I guess Anish's idea is basically the knight will retreat to any square, and then it's going to park itself on the f8 square and, you know, go knight on f8, you don't get a mate. And then everything is going to hinge on White's king. Does it have an escape route where it can hide to a safe spot, or is it just going to be vulnerable to the black queen checking him forever and ever?
Yeah, it's maybe the knight goes the other way, but anyway, a check would always be met by a block, and we do say a knight is a king's best friend. As Jovanka mentioned, no checkmate, and unfortunately, black has counter threats against the white king. It's hard to see any progress here. What would you guys do in the current position? I think I would push and then start to think.
Yeah.
Maybe the knight can go this way as well. Just maybe this is the safer one. It's a protected square, and it'll go back.
And then here I was thinking, you know, I think White probably has to establish a pawn chain first on the left side.
It's hard to achieve, though.
Oh, yeah.
If you push this pawn forward,
you want to gobbled, right?
You want to establish this, right, so they all defend each other, so you can forget. You kind of free up your knight from the defense. But yeah, unfortunately, any pawn pushes will always be met by a check, and the pawn would drop. Yeah, Anish. It's quite ugly what he's doing. He's just playing with his queen alone. This does not, I mean, at least for me as well, it's not instinctive. Playing with the queen, kind of letting the black king and knight defend for themselves. But he's just trying to annoy David Anton, essentially. Trying to frustrate him. Interesting position. Can White make progress? That's the question.
And David Anton kind of needs to get his king into the action.
Yes.
So does he need Anish to check him with the queen so he can move 1 square forwards?
Yeah, so any black checks would actually help the white king go where it wants to go. So ideally, White's king wants to step forward to the 2nd rank, maybe even the 3rd rank, maybe even the 4th rank, and keep dancing forward. Because the king won't really get checkmated if you're careful, but at the moment it's just a target if it's abandoned by White's queen and knight.
What do you think right now? What will be the result in this game?
I'm going to say it's going to be a draw.
Okay.
I think Black's queen is it's just too good.
Yeah.
I mean, what Anish is doing, I think it's ugly, but it's satisfactory. And that is why David Anton has captured the pawn.
Wow.
Wow.
Instead of pushing it forwards.
Yeah, that wasn't even on my radar, because he's voluntarily taking a wrecking ball to his pawns over there on the right. I mean, look at them. They're so ugly. They're all disconnected. We don't like that here in the studio, do we? We like pretty pawns.
But now, I mean, 2 Harrys are better than 1. White has 2 H pawns. And there's a concrete idea, right, Jovanka?
It certainly does.
So now we were expecting the pawn to push forward. This is what we call a harmonious pawn chain, 1 pawn island, to use Lawrence's terminology. But now this is not 1 pawn island. These don't defend each other. But the whole idea is that White's a pawn up temporarily, and if Black goes to recapture the pawn, White can give a check. Hitting the black king, the king has to move, and now this pawn is loose. So you couldn't actually give this check while the knight previously sat defending this square, but now it's possible, and you gobble up a pawn, you hit the black knight, you hit this guy as well, you hit this pawn, and it looks a bit scary for black.
Okay, that looks kind of good.
Yeah, it looks good. You also have to be careful of the white king. The white king is out in the open, but I think David Anton has spent his time, he spent 2 minutes on this move. It was calculating that White's king was safe, and this is why we say a knight is a king's best friend. The king is all alone here. It looks like it's about to get checkmated, if anything, but the white knight can just sit back and block. And knights are actually so good at stopping the opponent's queen from checking the white king. Just the perfect bodyguard, this white knight, and White has won a pawn. So interesting for Anish Giri in the current position. He wants to win a pawn back, of course, but can he do that right now? If the answer is no, then actually this pawn is going to push forward, and it's going to be like a battering ram, just going to open up the black king even further.
I think he has to take that pawn, to be honest with you. And he has to gamble on perhaps the queen and knight coordinating together. And otherwise, like David highlights, that pawn is going to step forward, and it's going to be a wrecking ball to black's position.
I'm going to say David Anton's going to win this. I think he's just playing really well. Black should still have enough drawing chances or drawing resources, but Anish is the one under pressure, and his whole mentality the whole game has been to try to draw. And we've seen that on the tour backfire so many times on any player if they're just playing with one result in mind, playing a bit negative.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, a long way to go, but heating up.
So, Kai, I have to ask you a question. What do you think of Anish's thinking pose? Like, because this is such a common chess player's pose, you know, we sit there with our head in the hands. Do you think that makes us look super smart, super focused, or does it just look a bit strange?
I don't know. It looks sensible. Yeah.
It's practical. He's holding up the heaviest part of his body with his brain.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, well, why do we do this?
Yeah. I mean, when I do it, it's either because I'm trying to block out the distraction, just block out all the light or the audience or anything, or it's because I know my position's bad and I'm trying to pretend that nobody else can see, nobody else can look into my eyes. And
What's your thinking pose then, Lawrence?
Oof. Well, I tend not to think. That's
it's a bad idea in chess.
Let me think. That's one, or...
Oh, I've seen you do that so many times with the hand.
Yeah, I've got the resting hand, I've got that one. I'm not really an arm cross guy, occasionally.
I've seen you do that, David.
Yeah, I try to do that if I'm acting confident or if I'm genuinely confident.
No, that's definitely one of your poses.
It's hard because it's instinctive, right? You don't even think about it.
Yes, you don't even think about it. Ivanchuk, who played, didn't he? He's got a famous pose. He twirls his eyebrow.
Yeah, we've seen that.
We saw that.
That's...
Magnus is often back in his chair, like, whoa, he fell off the stage.
Be careful.
He's just got his leg up.
Yeah.
Completely relaxed, you know? We're all trembling and he's just leg up, no problem. Yeah, I love this move. I mean, just returning to this game, Anish has spent 4.5 minutes here. That is a long time. And fair play to David Anton for finding this move, because G5 is the automatic move, and you're probably right, the knight reroutes, and it's not easy. And now Anish feeling a little bit of the pressure, actually.
He wouldn't have expected this one either, Anish, right?
Thinking for 5 minutes now, Anish.
And I was going to say earlier, Black's one saving grace was his clock advantage, Anish Giri, but now he's lower on time.
Yeah.
He's the one defending, remember, Black. He's long-term, statically, he's worse. Dynamically, right now, Black has some problems as well. And yeah, I mean, credit to David Anton. This last move, I think that's the toughest thing in chess, is breaking down your own kind of stereotypes, your dogmatic thinking. So we would think, OK, keep the pawn structure, advance forward, nice and intact, control. But he's just saying, no, I'm willing to lose control. I'm willing to worsen my own pawn structure because it works in this one specific moment. And OK, that's a check, forcing the white king forward.
Yeah, and the king has moved on to a row it wants to be.
Well, it will do in a minute,
Yeah.
Which square? There's 3 safe squares for the white king.
I was going to suggest this square.
Yeah.
Just so that the queen was not able to check the king along the G line. And this is nice.
Yeah, this must be good news for David Anton.
So the king, I mean, this is the critical moment. The king has to decide. It would normally want to step forward if we'd seen the pawn structure block up earlier, but it can't really step forward now. Again, there's a specific reason. The white king, it would love to kind of step forward and maybe kind of head into the black camp on a good day. But now if it steps forward, the problem is the knight takes the pawn with check. So this is the difference. It comes with tempo. White's king now is too far out in the open. For example, you don't want to step forward anymore because the black queen swoops behind and this would end in checkmate. So we still have to be careful, despite the fact it's an endgame with our king. We can't allow this to happen with check. The problem is here, black wants to take this pawn. If we get time now for white to come and check, then white would be doing well, maybe even winning, but it comes with time. So David Anton, in the current position, if he can't step forward, what does he do? Does he go back? Does he block with the white knight? If you block with the white knight, you lose this pawn. If you block with the white queen, you lose this pawn. So there's downsides to every move right now.
But you can play, for example, king f1 here, David, and...
Okay. If I keep checking you?
Now you check, and now I can try queen e1. I can try it.
Yeah, you can block, and I guess the question is what would happen, for example, in an endgame if the queens disappear, and now black can win his pawn back.
Yeah, and this is the endgame you have to... It feels like...
Wait 1 second.
Go on.
Because we were thinking about the king retreating, but we were not expecting the knight to take a step backwards.
He's just abandoned his queen side. So David Anton, he's going all in.
Yeah.
If this was poker, he's just pushed all his chips to the centre. He's saying, OK, have all my pawns, I don't even care. I'm going to go for your king. And he's pushed this guy forward. He's trying to ask Anish direct questions. So this is where you mentioned Kaya earlier. David Anton, is he going to kind of gamble at some point? Is he going to take risks? And this is the moment. Now Anish has to decide what to do with his king. He willingly captures the pawn. It was too strong. But now the black king is a bit open. White can even take this pawn, for example. I guess Anish's idea, if he takes this pawn attacking the knight, is the black queen can come back and defend. This would be a check and some nasty threats. If white's not careful here, if white blocks, for example, with the knight, you always have to look out for tactics. White's queen is undefended, and a knight check would hit the king, hit the queen, and when the knight disappears, suddenly we realise discovered attack, and the white queen would drop. And we might see this variation on the board. Maybe David Anton won't fall into that tactic, but maybe we'll see Anish Giri bring his queen back to the defence.
This is sharpening up really nicely, you know, because black's king could potentially be under fire within the next few moves, and there's still a lot of pitfalls to navigate. Wow.
You need to somehow teleport the white knight to f5. Again, the dream square, and then the black king is doomed.
Yeah.
But it takes a while.
Yeah, kind of like the mission is get that knight to the f5 square without allowing black a perpetual check. If you can do that, you're going to win.
Yeah, and 4 minutes against 2 minutes, Anish Giri now. It's harder to defend than attack, that's the cliche.
Here's a big moment, David.
Yeah, he's got to move his king.
He's got to move the king. Don't pick up the knight.
He could block with the white queen. That would be an interesting question, offering a queen trade if the white queen jumps back. But in a must-win situation, I'm not sure you want to calculate a knight endgame. White's pawns are all shattered now. It's white with 4 isolated pawns. So it's unclear if an endgame would suit white.
And we do have one big result. Vidit, who started out the day with 14 points, 1 point less than David Anton, has just won his game against Aditya Mittal, 3 points. So that means Vidit is now on 17 points, 1 point behind Anish Giri before this game.
Yeah, so he's also going to be hoping, Vidit, that David Anton can take some points off Giri.
Yeah. Unfortunately for Vidit, he actually lost in his game to Anish.
The head-to-head.
So in their head-to-head, he has the inferior tiebreak. So he'll be hoping to grab the points from Richard Rapport.
Yeah.
I mean, no one is safe. Well, those two aren't safe anyway.
Nope, definitely not.
OK, David Anton, he does decide to bring his queen back.
I think this is a good decision because Anish is the one who has to calculate furiously whether this endgame is survivable.
Yeah, the thing is, if black takes the white queen now, then white's king will recapture it, and white's king is perfectly placed in the centre. So it's a bit like earlier, Lawrence, where that trade of rooks, it's like, yes, you can exchange, but on my terms. What do we think? David Anton, he can avoid the queen trade again now, though. He can block this tension between the queens with the white knight.
Yeah, he can do that. He can even... I've got it's a bit strange. The move queen d4. Okay. What if I centralise the queen? And the idea is that after queen takes d4, I actually want to play the completely counterintuitive move c takes d4. The idea being that if the knight now goes to b6, you now play knight c3, and a5 is a threat in some variations, and the knight looks poor, and the king can come round via g3, f4, and the h-pawn will happily distract the black king, so the black king can't get too centralised. And, yeah, and if you don't play knight to b6, I'm going to go knight to c3 anyway on the next move, and if you put the knight on f6, I have a similar plan of walking in the king on the dark squares. It's a very unconventional idea, but it
makes some sense.
it's probably not good enough, but it's a sort of move that can be annoying.
Yeah.
What do you think, David?
I like that one too. I mean, the first move that I'm attracted to, just because black's king is very open, is to keeping the queens on the board, so blocking the queen exchange. White's knight is perfect in the centre, and there are ideas now of coming with a check, for example, or coming to the top of the board with a check. At least if I needed to win this game, I would probably try and do this first. But like you say, Lawrence, David Anton, we saw his Aimchess stats earlier. Very good in the endgame. He could maybe say, yes, queen trade, but on my terms. Very interesting move. So, OK, he spent a long time there, and he does allow the queen exchange. He goes after this pawn instead. So now the big question is maybe that variation you showed. If the queens disappear, black can now go for this white pawn. I don't like this at all. The queens have disappeared. Anish is going to go for this pawn, and you can't keep it alive. If you step it forward, then black comes in with a check, and the next move picks up this pawn. Things are starting to disappear. Surely this helps Anish.
It should do, but after king d4, knight takes a4, knight takes d5, is it so easy to play for black?
Not easy, but there's only 3 pawns left.
But my king is very close to just walking in and Pac-Manning.
Gobbling.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly. It feels like there shouldn't be enough left, and we actually
feels like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're heading in this direction. This is the current position, and yeah, it's rook's pawns. Knights are notoriously bad at stopping these corner pawns, H pawns and A pawns, because they can only stop them from one side of the board. So black's king is actually going to go and deal with one, and Anish is going to hope that his knight can deal with this white pawn. It's a race. Who is going to be quicker gobbling up pawns with their king? And okay, David Anton just happily pushes forward. I just think he's coming, and what do you do against that?
You're going to have to put the knight into a defensive square if you want to guard against the black king.
Stop my king advancing.
Yeah, but then again, you know, you're just going backwards. You're not coming forwards.
And
I
black can
agree
also
with
just
you.
kind of put a knight on his square.
Not enough pawns to cause any serious trouble to Anish.
Yeah, Anish doing a good job of defending this one. It feels to me like David Anton could have kept the queens on, maybe should have kept the queens on the board earlier. But this is the current position. Big threat, Anish Giri, to come and win White's isolated H-pawn.
All right.
The clock is ticking down. Did you see that? It's coming out to 1 minute.
1 minute left. These are the current standings. A bunch of games have finished. Anish Giri and Richard Report both still on 18 points, but Vidit, he is now on 17 after winning his game. David Anton on 15. If he wins this game, will be on 18, same as Anish and Richard. If it is a draw, he will be on 16 points. Arjun Erigaisi is still playing his game. Gukesh, he has lost his game. He is stuck on 21. A win for Vincent Keimer.
Breaking a terrible downtrend, by the way. He lost 5 in a row.
Incredible.
So it was an important bounce back game. Oh, of course, he's out of the running, but he's still for his confidence.
He's not yet, Lawrence.
Oh, actually, he might not be.
He had 0.3% chance.
Yeah. Right, so if he wins 2 more games, 21 points, could be enough.
He needs all the results to go his way.
And the tie breaks as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big ask.
Yeah, there was a tournament that you and I commentated on last year, Jovanka, in the Challengers Tour, where before the final day, I think it was Gukesh.
Yeah, it was.
He had 0.3% chance of winning the tournament, but he won his games on the last day and he won it. So
It's possible, yeah.
nothing. Yeah, never say never in chess.
Yeah. And for Vincent Keimer then, well, he will hope for draws mostly, and here we do have a draw.
Yeah, it looks like David Anton with that last move just offered a draw, simply running out of pawns. Black's king would take a pawn, White's knight would take a pawn, and everything would just disappear.